Welcome to episode 7 of the Practice Squad, a show where we talk about football and make the replacement refs look like pros. I'm your host and fourth string quarterback Jeremy, joined each and every week by my co-host and backup long snapper Joseph. How's it going, man?
I feel for you, brother. It's a tough loss you just had.
Yeah, this is a deflating episode of the Practice Squad. But we are live right here on YouTube each and every week at 8:30 p.m. Pacific, whether the Niners lose or not, right after Monday Night Football. If you're tired of the punditry or just want a fresh voice, come listen to a couple random dudes talk about football and have a good time. This week we've got a recap of this week's games, lots of awesome discussions. We're starting our top 10s segment series this week, so we're looking forward to that. And as always, at the conclusion of our show, we will do our predictions. So there's a lot to cover, so let's go ahead and dive right in to our Week 6 recap. So this week's game of the week, as selected by yours truly and yours truly co-host, was Chiefs at Patriots. What did you think of this game?
I think it might have been a sneak peek to the AFC Championship game.
I think you might be right.
Yeah, no, it was good to see the Chiefs on the road come back in the third quarter, actually the fourth quarter. Not give up, because it was looking like in the third quarter it was gonna be over. It was looking like the Patriots going to wrap it up. He's going to come back, and they kept fighting, and their defense stepped up to get back in the game. And then it was a shootout in the fourth quarter and a fun game to watch.
Yeah, I thought it was definitely a pretty close, exciting game pretty much the whole way through. And at the start of the season, I had said that the Chiefs were going to be the AFC bust of the year, and so far I've been proven wrong. We'll wait to see what the rest of the season bears, but they're definitely showing as of now that they're AFC Championship contenders. They're 5-1. They lost an obviously very difficult game on the road. Anytime you travel to Foxborough, you're going to have a tough time, and they put up a great show. I think they're, as far as I see it, you take the Patriots, you take the Chiefs. There's not really anybody else that really stands out right now. It's kind of similar to the NFC, where I feel like the Rams and the Vikings are kind of clear number twos. But again, I'm always a little bit nervous to say anything only 6 weeks in. So we'll see what happens. Their defense still worries me, and I think Mahomes, he was kind of nervous and a little inaccurate in the first half, and he throws across his body a lot, which I think is going to bite him from time to time, and I think it has started to a little bit. He's picked up some picks. But he still plays a great game. The scheme is perfect for him, and I just don't know if they have the defense and if he has the experience to actually win a Super Bowl this year. The Rams are a step ahead of them, I feel like, in terms of experience level. So if I had to pick between Chiefs and Rams, I'd pick I'd pick Rams. But so yeah, I did learn that this was the first 43-40 game in the history of the NFL. Did you know that?
No, that's such an odd thing. I wouldn't have suspected that, though.
Yeah, first ever 43-40 game in the history of the NFL. Have you noticed, I don't know if you've noticed this, but refs have been doing, this is more of a broader point, but refs have been doing more post-play conferencing on flags this year. Have you noticed that?
Not more than usual. No, I think the condensed version that we watch, I think that kind of takes away from that.
It does, yeah. It can. It gives you sort of a false sense of speediness in terms of figuring out the call. But I've noticed a lot of calls have actually been overturned in conference, more so than I've noticed in the past. And I think part of that might be, I know that they've let in kind of a slew of newer refs this year. And there's guys that are still getting sort of, I don't want to say still getting trained, but are immature in terms of their experience level on the actual field. And so there might just be the head guy sort of overturning more calls. And I like to see that because there's been times where they've definitely made pretty incorrect calls and then they'll overturn it to the correct call. And I see that a lot more than I see the other way around. So that's refreshing given referees' history in this league of oftentimes being wrong. So yeah, I don't know. I think my main thoughts about this game are I feel like Brady has slowed down a lot.
Yeah,
but he still has it when he needs to be clutch. And I don't know if that'll ever go away, to be honest. And now they're first in the AFC East because they have the tiebreaker over the Dolphins. So how do you feel about that?
That must be based on division games, right?
Well, they have the head-to-head. Isn't head-to-head first over
division record? That's right. They killed us.
Yeah.
Sorry, I repressed that game, so I forgot we played.
It's a repressible game.
Yeah, no, they have the head-to-head. Yeah, well, hey, you know what? Miami at least won today, though, so I'll take a pseudo shared lead for now.
Yeah, so
it's expected. It's expected for the Patriots to win the division.
Catch up by this point. Yeah, this is around the time in the season when the Dolphins start to tank a little bit. So, yeah. Speaking of that, do you want to go ahead and start us off talking about the Bears at Dolphins game?
Yeah, I will. Before I get to that, though, I just want to mention one play or two plays in the Chiefs game. Start with the serious first, and then go to the funny. So, did you see the guy pour the beer on Tyreek Hill?
I read about it.
So you have to watch the replay like 7 times and slow it down to catch who it is because it looks like it's a guy from the side, but it's right in front of him. So that's unacceptable. I mean, he goes up and they had a bunch of Patriot fans there, but you can see they're all yelling at him. I think one of them flipped him off. And then like this guy that was like in the second row just had like, I think a squirt bottle or something. There was a squirt bottle near him.
And he just launched a bottle of beer?
Well, no. So someone was holding a squirt bottle and you can't tell if it was his or not.
Oh, okay.
It's really hard to stop and play on there.
Right.
So I had to do it several times. But anyways, this guy just threw beer in Tyreek Hill's face. And it's just like, dude, it's a game. I don't care if it's the opposite team or not. And you're at home, like, it's a football game. And this guy's making millions of dollars, an NFL player. There should be some kind of general level of respect and maybe even like awe. It's like, oh, there's a football player here. Who cares if he's on the opposite team? And you're going to just disrespect him and throw a beer on him? So how stupid is that? So, well, not that, Boston is, or Massachusetts is known for its, excellent fans. But, yeah, that's just inexcusable. And then the funny play, and maybe this is where Brady was showing that he lost a step or two, and even mentally. Do you see the play where he had like 8 to 10 seconds of passer protection and he didn't get rid of the ball and then he got hit, sacked, and forced fumble?
I did see the whole game. I actually don't remember that play for some reason.
So that was a crucial play. I think the Chiefs.
I feel like I have a note on that somewhere.
Yeah, I want to say it was in the third quarter and the Chiefs picked up a scoring play. I don't know if they got a touchdown or field goal off that, but it was big. It was a turnover and they scored off of it. But Brady had like a world record for being in the pocket and passer protection. He's running around, and dodging, even though he's kind of slow. And he had like 4 opportunities to get rid of it. He was looking and he was pump faking and he didn't know what to do. And he's held onto the ball. He looked like Ryan Tannehill for how bad he held onto the ball. And then he gets hit from like behind and fumbles it. So I was like, that was just a major goof on Brady. Don't know what happened there. Maybe he thought he was faster or had more time or something, but he should have gotten the ball like 5 seconds earlier.
Yeah, I don't recall that play, but yeah, he definitely has lost it a little bit. I think his pistachio ice cream and Tom Brady snacks aren't living up to the name anymore.
But as for the Dolphins, we'll go to the Dolphins.
Yeah, let's move on to the Dolphins. So, were you guys playing the Broncos yesterday?
What?
So if you look at the jerseys, I legitimately
Oh,
I just kept thinking, oh, they're playing the Broncos today, and then I had to keep reminding myself that you were playing the Bears.
those are the classic away Bears jerseys, dude.
Yeah, and they look like the Broncos. Like, when is Peyton Manning coming out onto the field? I mean, it was so weird. It was so weird. So I'm getting asked in chat right now if I've started lamenting yet. I think I started pre-lamenting at around minute 3 or 4 when I figured that they were gonna melt down at some point, and then actually started lamenting, of course, as soon as that pass completion to I don't know who it was to get them to the 28-yard line to set up the field goal happened. So I have some yelling to do about that, mostly at the corners. We'll get to that in a minute, but we actually have a legitimately exciting, somewhat positive game to talk about with the Dolphins first. So
Yeah,
now that we've established that you guys were actually playing the Broncos yesterday, um, so I'll just say real quick, it was an exciting game, but it was also a very messy game, and it was sort of exactly what you'd expect from two mediocre teams having really good offensive days. There were 6 turnovers and over 1,000 total yards.
yeah. No, it was sloppy at times, and so Osweiler made some decent throws, but there was nothing impressive. So I was kind of curious to see how the Bears secondary didn't do much today. I will say, or yesterday, I will say that Trubisky looked good, made some good throws. He's nimble. That's forgot what I want to say about Patrick Mahomes. They both look pretty nimble out there. Dare I say, like a Russell Wilson. So that was exciting to see. But yeah, the Dolphins, you know, it, it was a tough game to watch at times because Osweiler doesn't have the best mechanic. I don't know how he throws so weak for such a big guy. He looks like he's throwing the ball so soft. And the defense looked good in the first half, but then the third quarter we were not very good. We did not. The Trubisky and the Bears made good adjustments to our defense, and the third quarter for us was looking very poor, and I was scared. I was getting worried in the third quarter that we were going to lose the game. But offense showed up. Frank Gore looked good. Frank Gore was a solid runner.
He looked really good yesterday.
A bruising back. Kenyon Drake. Okay.
Okay, hold on. I would not call Frank Gore a bruising back, but he played well.
I'm intentionally being over dramatic on that.
Okay.
Maybe I should practice on my announcer voice on that. But Chris Berman, back, a bruising back. There you go. There's a good Chris Berman. So, what was I saying? Oh yeah, Kenyon Drake. So I've already mentioned this before. I don't know if it was just you personally or one of our previous shows. Every NFL player, every single one, even if they have a college degree, 4 years from a good university in science or math or engineering, I don't care. Every NFL player, every single year.
Is this your running backs need to take a physics class shtick?
No, this is my every player in the NFL needs to take a physics class. Because I am sick and tired. And I was so frustrated about this that I was actually getting mad at Taylor Gabriel, the Bears player. He did this like 2 or 3 times in the first half. So I was so frustrated from just an objective standpoint that I was mad at the Bears player doing bad.
You really, heard it here first. Joseph, objectively frustrated.
Yeah, I can't take it, man. Kenyon Drake is so fast and so talented, but take a physics class, learn about momentum and acceleration and just common principles so that you can, get first downs and not have momentum and stop and think you're going to juke a guy out and then not going to get tackled. And it was awful. That was one thing I saw. Danny Amendola, he's lost speed, not that great. I'd say he's average now, but he just did several little things to get extra yards, and it was great. He would turn up field instantly when he got a reception, and he knew how to conserve his momentum and make good moves, and picking up an extra yard or two every now and then. Whereas Kenyon Drake, yeah, he's fast and agile, but several times where he could have gotten a first down or more yards, and it's like, no, let me just stop and then go backwards or lose momentum. And Taylor Gabriel just did it terribly the first few times, but then he made up for it. He had some amazing catches and played great afterwards. So yeah, take a physics class, learn how to. Right, those laws still apply out there, guys. I know you're great athletes and millionaires and all, but those laws still apply, and you'd be playing a lot better if you understood them. So, let me keep going. Let's see here. Our front line looked pretty good. The front line has been the only good consistent thing for the Dolphins.
Or the D line?
The D line.
Okay.
They've been the only good consistent thing for the Dolphins this season. Trubisky was just elusive today and made some great plays. I feel like there's one more thing I want to say.
You want to ask why they didn't give Gore the ball at the 1 yard line?
Oh, instead of Kenyon Drake, who fumbled it on the. It was such an awful fumble. Yeah, no,
that was an awful call too.
No, it was an awful call. And so was that's what it was. Okay, Osweiler's first interception was not a bad play.
That was the Hail Mary chuck at the end of the first half, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was
fine, and that was mostly excusable in my opinion.
Well, yeah, and the wide receiver should have been on the inside. He allowed the cornerback to push him on the outside, and yeah, it's basically a wash because it's like a punt and down at like the 5 yard line. So, but the second interception was pathetic. I watched that like 6 times on replay to see what's going on. Osweiler, he's a big guy, but he's kind of slow, and he turns and he's looking right in that direction, and he winds up. And if you watch in the replay, the second that he puts his arm back, the cornerback 23, Fuller, I believe his name is, already read the play. He already read it. And he just jumps in and intercepts it. You should never, on those routes, those quick, button hook turnaround routes, the cornerback was 5 yards off him. He wasn't playing exactly man-to-man. So he already has that cushion and he can read. The second that the wide receiver turns and plants and turns around and he sees Osweiler winding up, it's just a automatic interception. It's like a duh, he's throwing it here. So that was just a terrible call, which then, led to touchdown. And so Osweiler needs to, he's got to break off some rust because he hasn't been starting, but, he did play decent, and I'm proud of our team winning, but it, like you said, it was too sloppy, so I'll stop ranting there.
Yeah, so it was way too sloppy, and I don't feel like you guys should necessarily feel very good about this win when you sort of everything's happening at once and nobody understands what's happening at all. Those kinds of games are not usually games to be very proud of, but a win is a win, and I think it was the right call to start Osweiler. They needed to try something else, and he actually, so if you look at the numbers, he was 28 for 44, 64%, 380 yards, 3 touchdowns and 2 picks, one of which we established wasn't really his fault. And he actually, statistically, he had a good game. He actually had a pretty good game. The thing was, he just couldn't play the long ball. And he had a lot of those short dunk passes and screens. And, that kind of offense is not sustainable. Like, every time you throw it deep, if you're missing or you're throwing a pick, and every play has to be this short dunk pass, yeah, that can work if you're Aaron Rodgers, but that's not going to, teams are going to pick up on that, right? And so I feel like that worked for this game because they kind of had to change the scheme a little bit for him, but I don't know if that's going to keep working. So I expect those stats to go down significantly next week, no matter who they play, if they start him again.
One last thing.
Yeah.
We need to use Albert Wilson more.
Oh, yeah, dude.
The guy is just, he's so fast, and he's really agile, incredibly fast, and once he's out in the open field, he's dangerous. So I don't know why we're not using him more, because he's had so many big plays this season that's really saved us. So he needs
Yeah.
to be used more. And Jakeem Grant. Jakeem Grant needs to be used more as well.
Yeah, he had 6 catches for 155 yards with 2 touchdowns. Tyreek Cohen on the Bears side had a really good game too.
Oh,
He had
he's great. Dude, he's
5
so
rushes for
fast.
31 yards, a touchdown, 7 catches for 90 yards. Yeah, you had 2. There were 2 amazing speedsters on that field yesterday, and also Taylor Gabriel. I know you ripped on him, but I thought he had the play of the game yesterday.
No,
with
no,
that,
no. I agree.
That 54-yard reception where he was just draped by a defensive back.
Well, yeah, that's what I said. I said he made up for it. He made up for the first half by that. Yeah, no, that was definitely play of the game, and that was good chemistry. But yeah, dude, Cohen, did you see it? Did you see when they did the overtime toss? The difference in height between the two guys out there?
No.
Dude, it was Cohen for the Bears, and then some like all guy for the Dolphins. I don't even know who he was, number 90 something. There was, no joke, a foot difference.
Oh,
a foot
for the guys that they send out for the coin toss.
Yeah,
yeah.
The Dolphins player was a foot taller.
Yeah.
all right, we got to go to your segment.
Yeah, let's. I know. I actually, for one of those rare times where I actually am going to slightly enjoy talking about the Dolphins a little bit more than I'm going to enjoy talking about the Niners, and the reason for that is because there were actually a lot of good things that happened for the Niners today offensively. They were not perfect by any means, and I'll point out the problems. But as always, even on a devastating loss like tonight, I start with the good. So the first thing is I thought the 49ers moved the ball really well in the first half. They ended up the game with 401 total yards. Now, they were only 2 for 9 on third down, and that number felt like it was higher, but then I realized at the end that it was because they got a lot of first downs on second down, which is why it felt like they were moving the ball really well. But when it came to third down, they were not converting, and especially when push came to shove in the fourth quarter when they really needed to keep the ball, they could not get a first down. And it's inexcusable when you have a defense that's gassed. It's at the end of the game. You got to be able to get a first down. I felt like, again, they went a little bit too heavy to the pass, and they should have stuck with the run a little bit more. So that I think that was just, I feel like the run game fades as the game goes along, even though it's they're in the top 5 in rushing offenses right now, but the run game fades, and they had the lead. They were up 30-23 for so long, and it didn't make sense that they were trying to pass more. It just wasn't working out. So I felt like another week where that was kind of a mistake on their part. Beathard looked really good again. He was great against the blitz. He was pretty much perfect against the blitz and had a couple of really great drive extending runs. He ended the night 16 for 23 with 245 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. But the pick was late in the fourth quarter, and it was on a 3rd and 3, and I think the play call was just bad. He slightly underthrew the ball, and it was picked. I think it was on him. It was definitely on him, but it's not, if the one thing he does wrong in the whole game is throw a contested pick, I'd say that was a pretty good night for him. Marquise Goodwin is a critical component of this offense. The explosive touchdown that he had in the first half was amazing to see him back on his feet, running fast. I don't know if you knew this, Joseph. He was actually he was Olympic
yes
track runner. Yeah, so
I knew that.
Yeah, he's super fast. I think he's the second fastest guy in the league. I think is it Tyreek Hill for the Chiefs?
I wouldn't doubt
the
it.
Fastest, but slightly. If you compare, there was a article comparing their times, and they were really close, but Hill's a little faster. The O-line gave great protection tonight, despite the Packers who blitz a lot. They're known for blitzing a lot, and they were great in run blocking. The run game was amazing. I think they ended close to 200 yards on the ground. And they had decent pressure on Rodgers tonight. They had 3 sacks and a lot of pressures. It was just the corner play. And this is where we get into the bad, and I just keep harping back on this every single week. It feels like every other aspect of the game is improving except this. Outside of Sherman, who I know he had that illegal contact play that wiped out the Buckner sack in the fourth quarter that probably would have sealed the game, that's on Sherman, right? But the 521 yards of offense, 425 of which were Aaron Rodgers passing yards, that is on the other corners, because I don't think Sherman ever busted a coverage. It was the second corner on the left side, just over and over and over and over again, 30 yards, 40 yards, 50 yards, 60 yards. It was awful. It was absolutely awful. And I don't know if I don't know at what point heads are going to roll over this. I get that we've got some young guys, but honestly, I think we need to face the fact that we've got, outside of Sherman, on the other side, on the left side, we've got a bunch of overperforming second-tier players. Overperforming, meaning they're overperforming for a second tier, but they're not.
Oh, okay.
They're not first-tier quality players. In other words, overperforming backups. And so we obviously need to invest in the draft. We need to probably pick up a free agent. We just need to get more veteran, proven talent on that side of the ball. And they just got to be able to close games. They have to be able to close games. And I know that playing in Lambeau Field is hard, and it was cold, and they barely lost. But you got to win that game. It's not excusable that they lost. So just as far as kind of looking out of the future, Green Bay's offense looks like it's still ironing out their kinks. There were several miscues on the night. And they don't seem to be, they're not in it to the end this year. I don't see them going to the Super Bowl, especially with the Rams and the Vikings playing as well as they are, the other competition that's in the NFC. I really thought that they were going to be, but I don't think they're going to go that far this year. So yeah, as far as the Niner game, I mean, it was unacceptable, very disappointing, and the only bright side, I think, is that we saw a better pass rush, more blitzing. CJ Beathard continues to play pretty well. I didn't even mention the other two turnovers, the two fumbles, which are, again, unexcusable. And so we just have to do something at the cornerback position and safety. Those are the two weak points. And unfortunately, mid-season like this, there isn't really much you can do. You just kind of have to wait it out. So we're looking at a top 10 draft pick. All right. Do you have any thoughts on the Niners-Packers?
No.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I wasn't able to watch it, so I'll have to watch it sometime. See.
All right. So let's reinflate ourselves after that very deflating discussion. I don't have any major news or thoughts on the week as a whole. There were a lot of kind of upsetting games. Upsetting meaning, or I shouldn't say upsets, but there were a lot of very close, very difficult to call games this week, and some of them were fun to watch, keep track of. But I'm not aware of any major news that came out of the week. So we'll go ahead and move into our commentators say the darndest things segment. So our first quote of the week was one of the announcers during Monday Night Football tonight said, Mike McGlinchey, who's the right tackle for the Niners, he's been good at run blocking, but if you're an O lineman, you just can't allow penetration. Okay. Our second quote, and this is from our beloved Jason Witten, says, "There's no such thing as a rebuild. It's win and win now."
Oh my gosh. You've got to be kidding me. That's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard an NFL announcer say. What?
And what was worse about it was the other guy teed it off for him. So he said, what is that thing that you always say about rebuilds? And then Jason said, "There's no such thing as a rebuild. It's win and win now."
That doesn't even make any sense. It's like, what's your favorite color? It's orange juice. Like,
yeah.
Not even. Oh.
I mean, if the only kernel of truth in that is that I don't think there's really much evidence for the phenomenon of actually trying to lose games. So I think guys go out there trying to win. But there is a huge difference between the expectation of winning a lot and being in a rebuild phase. And the Niners very much are aware that they're in a rebuild phase right now.
Well, that and a rebuild is like, we're trading players, we're trying to store up draft picks, we're trying to see. It's different. It's so, they're not even the same thing. One of them is a methodology of getting better, and the other is playing as hard as you can. They're not even on the same. Oh my gosh!
Right.
Whatever.
So, and then the last thing. This wasn't a quote, but we got recurring physics lessons from Jason Witten tonight about torque and displacement and all the wrong things. As an engineer, you almost wanted to throw up. This was not the kind of physics lesson that Joseph's been calling for.
I'm glad I didn't watch it then, because I would have had a headache.
You and I are both mechanical engineers. We know when to call BS on that. It was awful.
Sorry, you didn't watch that then.
Okay, so we're gonna move into our new series of special topic discussions, starting with so the series is entitled Top Tens, and this series is going to be going through several different positions, starting this week with running back, and we're going to be looking first at the top 10 running backs of all time, and then the second half of the discussion for tonight will be the top 10 running back seasons of all time. So we broke it up. I took the top 10 running backs of all time, and Joseph took the top 10 seasons. So this is obviously going to be a discussion because what the list of top 10 that I put out there is up for debate. Although it's objectively right, of course, because
mine's not up for debate.
So I'll start by saying that kind of using the factors, or talking about the factors that I use to make the call on how to rank the top 10. And this is not just people thrown in the top 10. This is actually the order of the top 10. So from 10 to 1.
So we're going to give our methodology and criteria first?
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and give my methodology here. So obviously, when you make a decision like this, or when you make a list like this, you have to look at a lot of different statistics, and there's some X factors as well. But the main statistics that I used were total rushing yards, and this is career, total rushing yards, total rushing touchdowns, career yards per carry, the number of seasons that they had with over 1,000 yards rushing, the number of seasons that they had with over 1,500 yards rushing, years that they were the career leader in total rushing yards, so the years that they led in that category at the end of the year, the number of Pro Bowl selections, the number of All-Pro selections, and then also their fumble percentage, which is calculated by dividing their total career fumbles by their number of rushing attempts. And surprisingly, that actually was used once to break a tie in one of the ranks. So we'll talk about that. But so all of this was done. All of these stats were measured against the backdrop of total career length, taking into account also the NFL seasons that were only 14 years. And I think there was a chunk of the 70s. I don't remember. Did it go into the 80s?
No, it started. I actually took note of this because I actually had to use that for deciding mine. It was hard.
Right.
I believe here my note says 1978 is when it started.
1978. Okay. So just to zoom out again, I'm not sure if I was 100% clear on this at the start. So this new top 10 segment, we're covering running backs this week, and we're going to do the same format in future weeks. With next week, we're going to be doing wide receivers, and then we'll probably sprinkle a few more positions throughout the year. We're not going to do this every week for the rest of the year, but we're going to be doing it more. Because this is something that Joseph and I talk about a lot, and we decided to actually sit down, buckle down, and really do the research and present you guys with our findings. So let us know in the chat as we discuss these things if you vehemently disagree or if you think the list is pretty reasonable. Let us know what you think. So
and just to interrupt and
yeah.
support you here, and I guess support ourselves. We each spent at least 3 hours doing this. So we obviously there are things that we have to make assumptions. Every ranking and listing has an assumption, but we put in the time, so we'll see how it goes. But yeah, it wasn't something where it's like we just look at it. And,
I did it in 10 minutes, and it's the best list of all time. No, the story's going to change every week though, right? This week it's 3 hours. Next week it's an hour. The week after that, it took me 5 minutes. No, but Excel was our friend. Microsoft Excel was our friend in this. So let's go ahead and dive in. Enough chatter. So my top 10 running backs of all time, starting with number 10, is Marshall Faulk. Number 9 is Curtis Martin. Number 8 is LaDainian Tomlinson. Number 7 is O.J. Simpson. Number 6 is Eric Dickerson. Number 5 is Adrian Peterson. Number 4 is Jim Brown. Number 3, Walter Payton. Number 2, Emmitt Smith. And that leaves me with what I felt like was an obvious number 1, Barry Sanders.
Okay, good. I was going to say, man. I'm about to hang up.
So before I get into my reasoning behind my choices, what's your gut reaction to that list?
So pretty good. I personally did a top 5 and looked at that. I forgot that you were doing 10. And I looked at, so this is pretty close. So Sanders was my number 1. I have the only other options to put in the top 3 for me were Eric Dickerson and Emmitt Smith. So I think Eric Dickerson is the biggest disagreement we have, because
he's in your top 3.
He's definitely my top 5, and I have him at 3 or 4.
Okay.
And the reason is because, and so I remember I only put basically on my previous experience of doing this before in my life, and maybe 20 minutes of looking at it. So I didn't really dig in, but I put more weight to like the primes. That's the thing. We're already differing. This is a great discussion because we're already differing on our presuppositions, because I used to be a bigger fan of like total stuff, total yards and everything. Because I used to always have Walter Payton in the top 3, and Emmitt Smith was a tough one to put in there, but he was consistent enough. But Dickerson had like his first 4 years was like one of the greatest starts of all time, and he still had like 5 or 6 really good seasons. So I focused more on the prime. O.J. Simpson was a tough one because he had like a 4-year stretch that was amazing, but it was sandwiched in between 6 years that weren't that great. So yeah. O.J. Simpson at 7 is good. Faulk at 10, overall agree. I mean, he was an offensive machine. So if we did offensive player, he'd be one of the greatest. But he had a lot of receiving yards. His rushing overall was pretty good, but he did have a prime. He had like a 3-year prime that was out of this world. So Faulk at 10 is good. Curtis Martin at 9. I'm okay with that, though. I'm not the biggest fan of him, but 9's fine. LT, I think the biggest disagreements are going to be LT and Dickerson. I think LT is should be 5 or 6. But then again, it's kind of hard to weigh the other offensive production, receiving yards, and so forth. But he was just a beast in the red zone and scored a lot of touchdowns. Jim Brown is fair, right? How do you weigh the difference between the era he played and how dominant he was? But then he was so dominant. So I think your top 5 is very similar to mine. I would put Dickerson over Peterson after digging into Peterson's career. He has the yards per average advantage, but he was cut short. He had those few years of like injury and suspension and all that.
Right.
But it looks like our top 2 players we have in the same, or like top 3. So that's
okay,
fine.
so let me keeping in mind that we have viewers that don't have these spreadsheets that they can look at in front of them. Let's slow down a little bit and kind of look at each one of those points you just made, because I think that there's some interesting comparisons to make. And of course, in making a list like this, there's a lot of 1-to-1 or 1 versus 1 player versus player comparisons as you're deciding who's 5th, who's 6th, who's 7th. So the picking out a couple of the players you mentioned. So LaDainian Tomlinson first. So I'll read his line from the stats that I pulled. And again, there's debate about whether or not these are the best stats to determine where someone lies on this list. So his yards per carry was 4.3, which falls on the lower end of the top 15 or 20, I would say, of the cut. So at least in my top 10, 4.3 is in the bottom half. He had 8 seasons over 1,000 yards, which is middle of the road for the top 10. He had 3 seasons over 1,500 yards, which is also middle of the road. He was only the career leader twice, which is definitely in the bottom 2 or 3. His career was 11 years, so he was kind of average. The lowest was Jim Brown at 9 years, and the highest was Emmitt Smith at 15. So 11 is I guess slightly on the lower side. He had 5 Pro Bowls, which is the worst, or not the tied for the worst in the top 10, and he had 3 All-Pros, which is the tied for second worst. Now he was, of the guys I looked at least the top 10. He had the second best fumble percentage, so he was an extremely secure ball carrier, which I personally think actually is a big deal. But that's it. For me, it was more used as a tie-breaking factor than it was used as a primary, secondary, or even tertiary factor in deciding. So based on, if you just look at that stat line, for me, he clearly falls in 6 to 10, and then it's just a matter of where. And I felt like for him, 8th was pretty reasonable when I looked at Curtis Martin's below him and OJ Simpson is above him. OJ Simpson was a tough case. I agree very much with that, because he had a very short dominant period. He was 4.7 yards per carry, 5 seasons over 1,000, which is the worst. And when I say the worst, I mean the worst of my top 10. He had 3 seasons over 1,500. Now this was the big one. He had 4 years as the career leader. His career was 11 years, but like you pointed out, his 2 years on either side of the 2 years before, I think it was his 4 or 5 year dominant period, and the 2 years after were really mediocre. And so I felt like that hurt him a little bit. He had 6 Pro Bowls and 5 All-Pros, which is kind of a little on the low side. And he was also not a very secure ball carrier.
Now,
so yeah, specifically with LaDainian Tomlinson, I'm curious to know why you think he would be higher than that.
So I was just looking at this, and I think I was only thinking of switching him with OJ.
Okay.
Like, I guess, like, I agree that he's in the 6 to 10, but then I'm looking at this list, I'm like, man, I already did this, and I'm not going to put him over Dickerson. Like, at best, he's 6th, but I really think all I think I'd really do here is switch out LT and OJ. I think OJ had a more dominant prime then, and he was only playing 14 games. I think it's fair to realize. But LaDainian Tomlinson still had some very dominant years and was consistent. His last 2 years, he petered off for the Jets, but his first 8 or 9 years was very, very good, put up huge numbers, and was I don't know how you considered receiving yards, and part of that, because I know Marshall Faulk had a ton of receiving yards. So
I did not, to clarify, I weighted receiving yards as a 0 for this exercise.
So then, okay, that's fair. How did you come to Falk as number 10? I'm not saying I'm disagreeing. I'm wondering,
so
how did you weigh him versus others?
Right. So Falk was a weird one because he had his best marks were that he had 7 years over 1,000, which was middle of the road for the top 10. He had a 4.3 yards per carry, 12-year career. He had 7 Pro Bowl selections, which was on the top, sort of middle of the road. And he had 3 All-Pros. He was a moderately secure ball carrier. His problem was that he had no seasons over 1,500 yards, and he never had a career leading year.
So what I'm wondering, because he led yards in scrimmage like 3 or 4 years because he was an amazing receiver. He had 5 years, I think it's 5 consecutive years, I remember, of 80 or more receptions, which is insane as a running back. But I'm wondering, those Pro Bowls are contingent on his receiving capability.
Right. That's a fair point. That's absolutely a fair point. And that's why this is this is where part of the rub is how much do you weight a running back's all-purpose yards when you're talking about top running backs of all time? Is it more valuable from a pure running back perspective to have more all-purpose yards? I mean, if you think about it, if you're trying to make a list of best running backs of all time, you use running back statistics to do that, right? Just from a logical, basic level. But there is a little bit of a gray area in the fact that you've got guys like Le'Veon Bell, who has a lot of rushing yards, but he's also a really good all-purpose guy. And there's other examples of that. So I personally chose to not include rushing or receiving yards, but I do see your point, and I did not think of this, that the Pro Bowl and All-Pro selections would be impacted by their receiving performance. So if you're going to look at this and say, okay, maybe I would ding Falk a little more because some of that Pro Bowl and All-Pro clout would go away if you took away his receiving yards, then that's a fair point. However, if you look at the next 5 guys, and I took a lot of these guys from the top 10 rushing yards career and top 10 career rushing touchdowns as a way to kind of weed out other players. I looked at Marcus Allen. I looked at Jerome Bettis. I looked at John Riggins. I looked at Tony Dorsett. I looked at Frank Gore, even just to give myself kind of a reference point.
Look at Edgerrin James.
No, he didn't.
Yeah, I would put Edgerrin James here or Marcus Campbell.
Okay, see, they didn't even make it in the top 10 of any of the categories I was looking at.
Well, Campbell had a shorter career. Edgerrin James just had a good start his first 7-8 years, but I guess they're probably close enough to look at. See, that's the thing, is you were looking at totals, which is still fine. I guess it depends on how you want to look at the prime issue. What if, I'm not saying this is the case for Edgerrin, but what if it was where his first 6 years were amazing, and then he played 2 more and quit?
Well, that's where so the prime for me was, I didn't list it as that, but that's where the seasons over 1,000, seasons over 1,500, and years as career leader come into play. That was my way of looking at their prime.
Okay, let me look at it. Go ahead and keep talking. I'm gonna look at it.
So I think you make a great point about the all-purpose yards affecting this, and I would say that at worst, you could maybe argue that Curtis Martin and Marshall Faulk don't belong in the top 10 if you're only going to look at rushing yards.
Yeah.
But LaDainian Tomlinson and up, 1 through 8, all are solid locks within that top 10.
No, I agree. I keep going.
Even if you are, even if you remove rushing yards, those guys are still definitely in the top 10. Um, and Curtis Martin had 10 years over 1,000 yards, which is tied for second most. He had 2 years over 1,500. He led 1 year, and he had five Pro Bowls and 1 All-Pro, which is pretty low. But he was the most secure ball carrier of anybody in the top 15 or so. So he was also at 4.0 yards per carry, which is actually the lowest on the list. But he it was for me, it was really the 10 seasons over 1,000 yards combined with the 2 seasons over 1,500. And he had a bunch of seasons that were 1,200, 1,300, 1,400. So they didn't quite break the 1,500, but he was a very just really solid player all the way through. So he didn't have that kind of career peak that a lot of these guys had. Like the quintessential example of that was Jim Brown, who had, he was 5.2 yards per carry. His career was only 9 years, but he led 8 of those years and had 3 seasons over 1,500 yards, and was selected for 9 Pro Bowls and 8 first team All-Pros. So he led, yards per carry was the highest of the top 10. So yeah, I guess I'll just kind of wrap up my thinking on this with I think the career peak does matter. And if you have a condensed period of time where you're competing at an extraordinarily high level and you're dominating, then that will come through in years as career leader. It will come through in years over 1,500 yards. And the reason I selected 1,500 yards is because that's where you're almost at 100 yards a game, and it's just a really even milestone to kind of look at how dominant you're playing. 1,000 yards is sort of a it's more that more shows consistency than it shows dominance. I feel like seasons over 1,500 yards are going to show dominance. And the quintessential example of that is Barry Sanders.
Amazing.
Who, I'll read off his. He's the number one. So, and I haven't read off his stat line yet, so I'll read it off before we move on. So he had his career was 10 years. He had 5 yards a carry. 10 seasons over 1,000 yards. So every season he played, he had over 1,000 yards. He had half of those seasons were over 1,500. He led it. He was the career leader 4 of those years. And he led everyone else with 10 Pro Bowls. So he went to the Pro Bowl every year he played, and had 6 first-team All-Pro selections, and was middle of the road with fumble percentage. So he was absolutely phenomenal. For me, he was the clear number one, no doubt.
And what's amazing, and I'm doing this off of memory because I was looking at all these guys. On top of that, he. On top of the 5 seasons of 1,500 or more, that does not include the one season that was 1,470 and the other season that was 1,491.
Right.
And in one other season, he only played 11 games, and he still had a 4.6 yards average and over 1,100 yards. So that would have been another 1,400 yard season.
You're right.
So yeah, he just was, man.
Yeah, that's where cutting it off at 1,500 for some of these guys was a disservice because they had several seasons in the 1,300 to 1,400 range. But I had to make a cutoff somewhere.
Yeah. Honestly, the only 2 big changes are switch LT and OJ, and then switch Dickerson and Peterson, and that's not that big. Other than that, I'm in agreement, and I like your top 8 is really good, and. Once you get past the top 6 or 7 anyways, there's a lot of room for, who you're going to pick. But yeah, solid list, man. Good research. Good stuff.
Thank you. So yeah, I think I'll admit the Peterson-Dickerson comparison took me a while to decide who came out on top there. And LaDainian Tomlinson kept shifting around all the day long when I was doing this. He was moving all over the place. because he is number 6 in all-time rushing yards and number 2 in all-time rushing touchdowns. So that I had to keep that in the background as I was thinking about some of these other stats, because some of his other career stats aren't as glaringly good. But when you look at his career as a whole, he was a very strong player, which deserved him a place in the top 10, or earned him a place in the top 10, but not in the top 5. All right, so that's our discussion of the top 10 running back careers, or top 10 running backs of all time. So now we're going to transition into the top 10 running back seasons of all time. And Joseph had the freedom, the wherewithal, to decide what factors he was going to use in making that call. So why don't you take us through your factors, and then you'll list from 10 to 1 your top 10 running back seasons of all time.
This was tough. And there's so many. Yeah. Okay. So the first thing I had to decide was, am I looking at total yards from scrimmage or just rushing yards? So first thing I did was I just looked at like the top 20 in rushing yards, scrimmage yards, touchdowns, and assembled a list of like 25, 30 guys, and then went from there. And like Jeremy said, Excel was our friend, and whittle it down. So I had to make a decision right away and say, look, I have to do something about these receiving yards, because are these all screen passes? Is it the quarterback? We don't know. I don't really want to punish a guy. Like Terrell Davis was one of the hardest decisions where to put him in this, because he didn't have that many receiving yards, but he had over 2,000 rushing yards. And it's like, well, duh, he needs to be in the top 10. It's only happened, 6 times or so. So I didn't want to punish a guy for being a pure rusher, but I didn't want to overly reward a guy for having a lot of receiving yards as a running back, nor punish him if he's somewhere in the middle of the road. So what I ended up doing was I came up with effective yards. And for me, what I did for effective yards was I added rushing yards plus 60% of the receiving yards. I thought about doing 50-50, but I was like, you know what? Most of these are probably short passes, and then the ability of the running back afterwards. I'll give him a 60-40 split. So I did that.
Was that sort of, just to clarify, was that sort of a way to cut down the yards before catch? Sort of so to give credit to the yards after the catch? When they're receiving?
Yeah, and I could have done 50-50, but I chose 60-40 because I just assumed that how many of these are like screen passes and short passes, and then afterwards the running back kicks in. So really it was just kind of a arbitrary choice, but I couldn't go 100%. There's no way I can give all the yards to the running back. That's just an obvious no.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
So that obviously hurt guys like Marshall Faulk, but then he still had really good numbers. So and he was difficult. So then what I did is I put in, I weighed rushing yards per attempt very heavily, right? Because I figured rushing yards and rushing yards per attempt, and let's say fumbles, are really the only things that a running back can control per se. Like those are their guaranteed stats. But when you look at like total touchdowns, receiving or even rushing touchdowns, well, did the quarterback just want to hand you the ball? Were these all at the goal line? How good's your offensive line? Like, there's just so many factors. So I definitely used touchdowns and fumbles as a way to kind of compare guys at the end. But to me, rushing touchdowns was not I didn't really consider that very much.
Yeah, that's why I didn't consider it at all. For what you just said.
Yeah, that's good. So effective yards. So what I did is I ranked all of these guys. Excel, does this, your data filter, in terms of effective yards and then yards per attempt, right? And I put down their relative position for each column in this list to see, well, what if a guy was really good at yards but less at that? So when I did that, then I just added those together. I averaged them. So if a guy was, fourth in effective yards and second in yards per attempt, you would get a value of 3 and then rank that. So that clearly gave me like a top 6 that was like easy to see. So then I wanted to do a weighted average. I thought to myself, you know what? I'm really big into this yards per average thing. These guys all have a ton of yards. I did the average on it. For all of these guys, the average effective yards was 2,080. And the standard deviation was only 100. What that means for those who don't understand, basically, the range of data was very close. So, but the rushing yards per attempt was huge. It varied from like 4.6 to 6.4. That's a huge relative range. So I applied a weight, a 70-30 splits, 70% rushing yards attempt for their position. And the same players that were in the top 6 for the first list, they moved around a little bit, but they stayed the same. I was like, okay, there's my guaranteed top 6. Now I got to finagle the rest. So I looked at which guys showed up in the average and the weighted average, and I was able to pick off another 2 or 3. But then I really started to struggle with 2 guys, Terrell Davis and Jamal Lewis. They both rushed for over 2,000 yards. They were in the middle of the range, middle to lower range of yards per attempt, but they didn't have that many receiving yards. So I really feel like I want to apologize to Tiki Barber and Amon Green, because I feel like you guys got screwed. I tried my best. I feel like Tiki Barber should probably be in there, but his receiving yards really helped him. So that was a tough one.
Episode 7 of the Practice Squad, Tiki Barber gets screwed.
So
continue.
So then I narrowed it down to 13 seasons, but then I just had to get rid of Marshall Faulk because I figured, you know what? He had a ton of receiving yards. So I dropped him. So I narrowed it down to 12. So I have my 12 here. 2 are honorary mentions because the difficulty, see, this wouldn't show up very much for you for a career, but it showed up for me. And that is the 14-game season. What do you do with a guy who had a 14-game season? And it was amazing. So this, again, I guess this is Practice Squad number 7. Apologies to Walter Payton. So Walter Payton, if he had played 1 or 2 more games, he would have definitely been in there. I probably could have put him in there anyways, but he had a lot of fumbles. His yards per average was in the middle. If he played a full season, he would have been in there, but he just barely beat out. So my first honorary mention, or number 2, is LaDainian Tomlinson, 2006. I guess I'll just list effective yards and then yards per carry and then any other distinguishing fact. So 2,120 effective yards, 5.2 yards per carry. He had very little fumbles, but more receiving yards. He's my honorary mention. My number 1 honorary mention, Walter Payton, 1977, the year before the expansion. 2013 effective yards, 5.5 per carry. Had a ton of fumbles. All right, my top 10, here we go. O.J. Simpson, 1975. 2,072 effective yards on 5.5 average. With 7 fumbles. Number 9, Jamal Lewis, 2003. 21-29 effective yards on 5.3. Number 8 is Terrell Davis. 21-38 effective yards with 2,008 of those being rushing. On a 5.1 carry and only 2 fumbles. Number 7, Barry Sanders, 1994. 2,052 effective yards with a 5.7 yards per average and 0 fumbles. Number 6, Jim Brown, 1963, who only played 14 games, put up 2,023 effective yards on 6.4 yards per carry. Number 5, Eric Dickerson, 1984. This is the year that he had 2105 rushing yards. He had 2,188 effective yards on 5.6, but he had 14 fumbles. But he has the all-time rushing record, so I had to put him in the top 5. Number 4, O.J. Simpson. So second appearance here, 1973. 2,003 rushing yards, 2,045 effective yards, so basically no receiving yards, on 6 yards per attempt, and 7 fumbles. Number 3, CJ2K, 2009. 2,300 effective yards on 5.6 yards per carry, and only 3 fumbles. All right, top 2. Adrian Peterson, 2012. 2,227 effective yards on 6 yards per carry and 4 fumbles. And number 1, for his second appearance in the top 10, and just like the career all-time, Mr. Barry Sanders, 1997. 2,236 effective yards, 2,053 of those were rushing, 6.1 rushing yards per attempt, and only 3 fumbles. And he showed up his was clearly the number 1, no matter how I did it. Chris Johnson was fighting with him a bit because of the receiving yards. But yeah, that is it, my friend.
Okay, so I noticed the trend I noticed was that as you went up the list, so got closer to the number 1, that the yards per carry were increasing generally.
Yes, because of the weighted average, and
that the effective, what you're calling the effective yards, were fluctuating somewhat, kind of around a median, and
yes,
would go up and down. And then the fumbles seem to be kind of all over the place. So I'm curious why the second OJ season that I think you ranked as was it number 3 overall? Or was it number 4?
Yeah.
Number 4?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Why was that not better than the number 1? The Barry Sanders year? Because I think he had more, his yards per attempt was better. I think it's 6.6 versus 6.1.
No,
right?
no. It was 6.
What was the 6.6? Or am I making that up?
There were 2 5.6s.
Okay. So it was 6 versus 6.1?
Yes.
Okay. So 6.1 was the highest.
Yes.
Okay. All right. That, I think I just misheard you say that. So then that would clearly be the best.
Yeah. But I could make a case for OJ in that year. He only played 14 games, so he would have had like 2,300 yards. But I only used that to massage the data a little bit. I wasn't gonna just take away, because who knows? What if a team would have used a running back less per game if they played more games? So I couldn't do too much there. Plus, he did have less receiving yards, so that affects it a little bit, and he did have more fumbles. So it was close. The top 4 are all really close.
Right.
But
yeah, that makes sense.
So that's why. So yeah, if it was 6.6, I probably would have given it to him, or at least bumped him up to number 2.
Okay.
So yeah, the top 6 or 7 was very easy, but 8 through 13 was just a nightmare. I think I spent at least an hour of my time just moving guys around, looking at that, trying to do the philosophy in my head of what matters. So Terrell Davis was not showing up in my top 10 like at all. He was like number 11 or 12. But I was not going to take a guy who had tied for second for most rushing touchdowns, which I put a little bit of factor in, and had, I think, 4th or 5th all-time rushing yards. Like, I wasn't going to punish a guy for having 2,000 rushing yards. So I had to do a little bit there. So I'm very confident with my top 7, but after 7, it's just like, ugh, I don't want to do this again.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good list. Good work. I think it generally made sense to me. Hopefully, the same is true with our viewers. Let us know what you think. If you disagreed on any of that, if you generally agree on the approach, the methodology is obviously going to be the area for the debate, not so much the execution of the methodology. So if you disagree, think something else should be weighted more, something should be weighted less, let us know, because we are going to do this in future weeks. And since we're doing wide receiver next week, I guess we'll solicit feedback now. What factors do you think are the most important to consider for a wide receiver? Would you consider touchdowns an important category? Would you consider total yards an important category? What are the sort of things that you would consider to be the important categories? All right, so that concludes our special discussion segment of the week. So we're going to move into predictions. So at the conclusion of tonight's game, both Joseph and I picked the Green Bay Packers to win. So I am 9-6 on the week, and Joseph is 8-7. So our current season record, mine is 55, 36-2, and Joseph stands at 52, 39-2. All right, so games this week. First, starting off, I guess I'll go first on the predictions. So our first game's Broncos at Cardinals. I picked Cardinals.
Broncos.
Okay. That's a close one. Titans at Chargers.
Chargers.
Same. Bills at Colts. I picked Colts.
Same.
Patriots at Bears.
I feel like this was a tough one, but I went with Patriots.
Okay, same here. They're starting to show that life, that Patriot life that always comes alive at a certain point. Browns at Bucks. I went Bucks.
Same.
Another one that could easily change. Lions at Dolphins.
All right, I'm going with them now. And plus, we're 3-0 at home, so.
Yeah, you guys are playing well at home. And I went with you guys on this one, too. So, Vikings at Jets. Vikings. Panthers at Eagles.
This was a tough one, but I went Eagles.
Same. Texans at Jaguars. I'm going Jaguars.
Texans.
Okay. Understandable, as Jaguars their offense has been extremely weak the last few weeks. Saints at Ravens.
Saints.
I want Ravens, but another one that I can see going either way. Cowboys at Redskins. I'm going Redskins.
Same.
Rams at 49ers.
Rams.
Same. Bengals at Chiefs. I'm going Chiefs.
Yeah, I went Chiefs here. I would have went with the home team. So, like if it was,
I might have still gone with Chiefs by a hair if they were road. But anyway, yeah, that Chiefs there. Giants at Falcons.
Falcons.
Same. And on buys this week, there's 4 teams on buys: Green Bay Packers, Oakland Raiders, Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Seattle Seahawks. So we disagreed on 1, 2, 3 games this week. So more like the average, I'd say. Last week we were 5 off, and we somehow ended up only 1 game different in the final result. So my game to watch of the upcoming week is Bengals at Chiefs. What's yours?
Saints at Ravens.
I will probably be watching that game because I think not only is this a critical game for the Saints in terms of their playoff run, but it's also going to be interesting to see how the Ravens handle it because I'm not sure what to think about them.
But we're going to decide Bengals and Chiefs because last week we chose mine. So
right. So our actual game to watch that we'll be discussing next week on the show will be Bengals at Chiefs. Andy Dalton versus Patrick Mahomes. Wow. You would end this devastating episode of the practice squad because the Niners lost by saying something like that. Okay, I think that's a wrap.
No, not yet. I have to read
this
ESPN, on the ESPN game for the Niners game. Rodgers engineers masterful game-winning drive in final minutes. I'm sorry, man. I had to.
I don't give Rodgers a whole lot of credit for it, honestly, but whatever. If we had half decent corners, the game wouldn't have even had an opportunity to be that close to begin with. So, whatever. We'll congratulations to the Green Bay Packers for winning tonight's football game. That is a wrap. If you enjoyed tonight's episode or any of our past episodes, please like, share, and subscribe here on YouTube, as those are free ways for you to support our show. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at The Practice Squad and at Neuralizer_. Just as a reminder, if you've missed past episodes, you can watch or listen to them right here on my YouTube channel. I typically upload on Tuesday evenings, the day after we go live. As always, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week.